There's a pretty one, Ulysses. There it is.
Hello BookTube, I'm Sean the Book Maniac. Welcome back to my channel. This is becoming a Sunday evening routine, settling down with a glass of wine or two and doing a book tag or a BookTube video of some sort. Maybe 2 glasses of wine, or is that 2 bottles of wine and 2 tags? We'll see how the evening progresses. The night is young. Today I'm doing a wonderful new tag which is freshly created by just one reader. If you haven't seen it, please stop this video and go back because it is extraordinary. Juan performs performs snippets of the various songs from the musical. So, let me first say I've watched Juan's video, I don't know, half a dozen times, because he sings and it's beautiful. And also I watched it just one more time before I filmed this video because I'm not a musical guy. In terms of Broadway musicals or show tunes or any of that, I didn't get that gay gene. I just didn't get it, so I'm not so interested in it or this musical in particular, but musicals in general. However, I watched the video one more time to get the pronunciation of these various characters. So let's see how it goes. I studied an excerpt of Les Miserables in high school. It was called Jean Valjean, and it was his story, or part of his story from the larger novel. Someday I would like to read the full novel. I have no desire to see the musical. But I loved Juan's tag video. It was just fantastic. So let's get started. The first tag is Jean Valjean, a book that deals with morality or journeys. So I chose one that deals with both, that I've never seen talked about on BookTube, and I have not yet talked about on BookTube. It was one of my favorite books of 2016, and it is a 2016 debut. It's a weird book that I just loved. It's called A Paper Sun by Jason Buckles, and the main character is a half Chinese, half Caucasian American teacher, middle grade teacher I believe, or elementary grade teacher, who one day when he's supervising his class, and it's a rainy day, which begins like weeks and weeks of rain in California. So I forget if it's San Francisco, but it's California. He's drinking a cup of tea while he's marking papers, and his students are quietly working, or maybe not so quietly, when suddenly he looks into his teacup and he sees the image, 3D image, of a Chinese family on a big boat. Father, mother, and young daughter and younger son, and he's transfixed by this bizarre phenomenon, and then the image after a moment or two vanishes, and he's so struck by it. He's also a creative writer that he goes home and writes a story about this family on this ship and sends it to the local creative writing rag, and they publish it almost immediately. And the day of the publication, or the day after, there's a knock on this Peregrine, the teacher's door, by a middle-aged or maybe 60-year-old Asian American woman saying, "That was my uncle, Henry, in that story you wrote. What happened to him? I've been trying to find out what happened to him all my life." So it's a little bit of a slipstreamy story, and I have a high allergy to literary gimmicks, and this one didn't trigger that allergy. I found it just a wonderful literary treatment. So the story is that the family that appeared in his teacup were a family that were actually returning to China from America for a visit. The return visit was maybe in the 1920s or 1930s, that they returned to the father's ancestral village in China, and then a lot of cruel and sad things happen, and some of the family ends up back in America. But this little boy who appeared in the teacup with his family, his niece is the one who knocks on the man's door, and it just goes from there. It's a profound meditation on family, immigration, identity. I loved it. I will be following Jason Buckles' career from here on in. Number 2, Javert, a book that was fierce, relentless. So I have 2 to talk about. The first one, it was a bail for me, and I'm going to explain why I bail, And in order to explain why I bailed, basically I bailed because this book was too intense, too relentless, and so multiple trigger warnings. I will explain very briefly, but without pulling any punches, what kind of violence made me bail. So if you are queasy about that, I will raise my hand, and then while I express those 2 or 3 sentences and then put my hand down when I'm finished, if you don't want to listen to the horrendous violence that made me bail on this book. But the book is called The Painted Bird by Jerzy Kosinski, a Polish-American novelist, I want to say Polish-American, but I'm sorry, I'm not sure if he was American. And I was listening to it on audio while following along in the printed book, and I loved the audio narration, and it was about this young Polish Jewish boy who is abandoned or perhaps sent away for his own safety by his parents, and he wanders from village to village during the Nazi occupation of Polish and gets taken in by this strange character, and in the next chapter another strange character, and it's very grotesque, but I can handle a lot. I actually think this is a book that Juan might enjoy because he chose for this category American Psycho, which I can't even hear anybody talk about it without getting horrified. So you couldn't pay me to read that book. So that makes me think this might be a book for Juan. But this was not a book for me. So like I say, each chapter the little boy is with a different family or a different person. And I got to about, I think, the first 3 chapters were really heavy, and there was lots of violence. There was a woman who burns to death, and it's described in detail. But then in chapter 3, okay, now time for my hand to go up. When I put my hand down, in a moment, I'm going to raise my hand like this, and then I will keep it up, and when I put it down, that's when you can turn the volume back up or stop fast forwarding or whatever you're going to do. That's probably overkill. But in chapter 3, the little boy is apprenticed or hired by a farmer, and he has a much younger wife who he is very protective and obsessively jealous of, and the young voluptuous wife doesn't seem to really love her husband, and she has eyes for the young hired man, not the main character, who's only about 6 or 7 years old, but a 20-year-old, 19-year-old hired hand. The farmer is so jealous that one day at supper, when he catches them making eyes at each other, he pushes the hired hand up against a wall and gouges his eyes out with the dessert spoon. And they roll down onto the floor, and the cats play with them. So that was too much for me, but I thought, okay, maybe that's just one incident like that, and I'll be okay after this. But in the next chapter, he's with another guy, and the character in that chapter is a purported nymphomaniac named Ludmilla the Stupid, who every man in the town is stopping, having sex with all the time, and finally the women of the town gang up on her and kill her by, they torture her, and then they kill her by sticking a bottle full of cow manure inside her and then smashing it. There, that's enough, and maybe too much. I bailed. I just said, no, not if it's going to be like this from chapter to chapter. And it was just kind of random, but the writing was so beautiful, and the image of the painted bird was such a key. It was more than an image, it was a symbol, and he had just introduced that in one of those 2 chapters, and I was really, but I said, no, I can't, that's too much, it's too much. So, Juan, please check it out and let me know. The one that I will say was relentless emotional intensity that I did love. One of my favorite reads this year, and I know that Juan and I agree on this one because he used it for another prompt, and I've talked about it before, including in my introduction video, Idaho by Emily Ruskovich. So I'm not going to say anything about this because I've talked about it a couple times, but my new practice when I mention a book multiple times is, instead of regurgitating anything, I'm just going to read you a standalone quote to give you a sense of the beautiful writing, and in this case the emotional intensity. I guess just to give some background to this, the main characters here are Anne and Wade, and Anne is Wade's second husband. They met during his first marriage when he was taking piano lessons from Anne, and now they're married. And now Wade, even though he's a young man, maybe in his 50s, is losing his memory quite rapidly from some kind of a hereditary dementia. Together, Anne and Wade sit on the piano bench. She turns the pages, which every week grow simpler and simpler. One week he's playing both hands together. The next week he struggles on a children's song with only his right hand. Slowly, as the weeks go by and the weather turns cold, she turns the pages backward. They return to the place where they met, to the place where he didn't know the names of any notes, where he showed delight inside of his struggles to learn them. He taps on his thigh, 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3. But even that proves difficult, eventually. Eventually, she puts the metronome away. Number 3 is Fantine, an emotional book that tugs at your heartstrings. And for this, I will choose one that there's a lot of mixed feelings about, but was one of my top reads last year, and that's Emma Donoghue's novel, Room. I think everybody knows what it's about, so I'm not going to really talk about it. It's about the young woman who's kidnapped and kept as kind of a sex slave in the man's shed for years, and she gives birth to a son from him in captivity, and his name is Jack, and so the only world that he has ever known up until a certain age of 5 is that room where they are held captive. He has no other frame of reference except what he sees on TV, but he has trouble processing what is TV. Now, it may be the only Emma Donoghue that I like, because I bailed on 2 others of hers last year that I didn't like at all, but I really loved Room. Number 4 is Marius, a book that has a little bit of everything, and this prompt confused the heck out of me, so I ended up taking a smart-alecky approach to it, and I went through a few books that I have loved and have read on ebook, and did a text search. Oh, I'm such a geek. I did a text search of the word everything, and I chose the book that had the least occurrences of everything, because that's a little bit of everything. How many of you are going to turn the video right off now? So, the winner, or loser, is a novel from the late 1970s called Offshore by Penelope Fitzgerald. This is a British novel that won the Booker Prize in 1979, and I read it at the very end of last year. It's a short little novel about a bunch of odd folks living on houseboats in London on the River Thames, and they are an odd bunch of characters. This is the first and only book by I always have to check, is it Lively or Fitzgerald? Lively or Fitzgerald? This is the only book of Penelope Fitzgerald's that I've read so far, but I want to read absolutely everything else, because this was really strange, and this was a really wonderful little novel. She's an enigmatic writer, and she describes things really well, but she keeps you guessing, and she withholds a lot. There were some things that I missed. For example, there's a gay character who's turning tricks on his houseboat, and I totally missed that he was gay or a hustler. So you have to really pay attention. So there's a little bit of everything. Juan, are we still friends? Number 5, Eponine. A book with a tragic love story. And I also had to rack my brains because I don't really... This prompt was fascinating for me because it made me realize I don't read a lot of quote-unquote romantic literature. I'm not really interested in it. If I did a rundown of the top 10 books of my life, none of them would have a predominantly romantic plot. I did read one last year. I believe it's a 2016 debut. That is definitely a tragic love story. It's called The Story of a Brief Marriage by Anouk Arud-Prakasam, who is a Tamil Sri Lankan writer, currently, or at that time, doing graduate studies in America. Sorry, here it is. This 190-page novel is set in a Tamil rebel camp during the most recent Sri Lankan civil war. And it's at the end of the war when the Tamils realize that they have been defeated, and it's only a matter before the government forces completely crush them and probably slaughter all of them. So it's in the last days of that war, and the situation is just incredibly bleak. Dinesh is the main character, a young man, and he's helping bury bodies and treat the wounded with almost zero medical supplies, and it's just horrible. And one of the men that he's working with, who's older than he, suggests that he marry his daughter, that Dinesh marry this other man's daughter. They're about the same age. And it's just kind of like, really? Why? What does that even mean if everybody's going to be dead within a matter of days? What's the purpose? Dinesh had never met his daughter. Maybe he'd seen her, but the flip side of that, what would be the point is, why not? So he does, and it's the story of the few short hours of their marriage, and it's very tender, it's very bleak, it's very beautiful. I would say it's just this much overwritten, but he's a beautiful writer, and it's a book that I will never forget. So, The Story of a Brief Marriage, tragic love story, and more. Cosette, a book where the characters are trapped in dire circumstances. My last book would definitely fit that bill too, but I'm going to mention, and very briefly, and then read you a short quote from my second most favorite book ever. And again, this is my new policy. If I'm going to continually refer to books, I'm going to throw out a new short quote each time, rather than just repeat myself. So, it's A Constellation of Vital Phenomena by Anthony Marra. These characters are trapped in the Chechen War. One of the main characters is Ahmed, and he has a wife who is sickly and bedridden, but there seems to be no real reason, medical or psychiatric. Like, the doctors say there's no reason why she's bedridden, but basically the reader comes to understand that it's just her way of dealing with all the trauma around her. But here is a scene between them. There's a reference to Doka, who is the across the street neighbor, and he is a pretty important character, especially his young daughter is a main character. For 8.5 months he cared for her with paternal devotion, but each morning as he set the teacup on the nightstand he wondered if physical deprivation might revive her ailing mind, and so 10 days before Doka lost his fingers, Ahmed left her teacup in the kitchen. As the day wore on, she called his name in cries more confused and desperate with each iteration, until his name was no longer his, but a word of absolute anguish. Unable to stand the call of his name, he stayed with Doka's wife and daughter for 3 nights. On the 4th morning, he returned and found her on the bedroom floor. The beginnings of bed sores reddened her shoulder blades. In that moment he came to understand that he would spend the rest of his life atoning for the past 3 days, and that the rest of his life wouldn't be long enough. He lifted her from the floor and set her beneath the sheets. He took her a glass of water from the kitchen, then 5 more. "You never have to get up again," he promised her. He laid his head on her chest, and her heart pattered against his temple. "Ahmed," she said, "Ahmed." His name was now a lullaby. Oh, I love this book so much. Oh, it's such a powerful book. Woo-hoo-hoo-hoo. The next, number 7, is the Thenardiers. Once I watched it the last time. No. It's a book with a comic plot or comic elements. So this gives me a chance to talk for the first time in a while about another of my favorite reads from last year, The Portable Veblen by Elizabeth Mackenzie. I think that I mainly talked about this on my discussion video about ebooks, audiobooks, and printed books. I talked about it quite a bit there, so please check that out if you're interested. I'm not going to spend a long time talking about it, but I don't really go in for comic literature, humorous stories. I like to feel sad more than I like to giggle when I'm reading. But The Portable Veblen was a very emotionally resonant novel that also was just hilarious. And as I said on that other video, this is a book that I experienced on audio and narrated by, I meant to double check this, is it Laurence Bouvard or Laurence Bouvard? Anyway, Laurence is a female, and her narration, I'll put the correct name in the bottom. Hadn't made the same as, I forgot it when I did this 6 weeks ago, and I've forgotten it again. But anyway, masterful narration, and the main character is Veblen. She's named after the political philosopher, and she's engaged to a scientist guy, and she has all kinds of issues with her mother, who is one of the most dementedly dysfunctional mothers in literature, and her character and her voice is done so hilariously on the audio that I really think, please do the audio, read this together with the audio, or do the audio only. I did it audio only and now have picked up the book, and someday I will read the book itself, but the audiobook of this is just incredible, and especially because of Veblen's mother and how that voice is done. Just amazing. Now, Veblen is also, she has a bit of a hang up about, she loves squirrels, and she thinks that she can talk to squirrels, and so her fiancé and her mother both are a little worried about her, and that's done quite wonderfully in this novel too. So not just a comedy, but with very comedic elements. One of the most satisfying reads last year for me. Number 8, Enjolras, a book about masculinity or heroism. So this is not really about heroism, but it's definitely about masculinity, and one of my top reads this year. I did a separate review of it, which has got about 7.5 hits since I put it up 10 days ago, which is just so interesting, right? People just don't click on reviews unless they're already interested in the book on BookTube, and I've heard many people talk about it, and that's fine, but I thought if I mention it here, maybe people will go click on the review, because I really would like more people to read the book. So I'm not going to regurgitate what I said there. Here's the book, one of the best covers of 2017 as well. Stephen Florida by Gabe Habash. And it's about a hot, young, macho college wrestler competing for a college championship. And if that sounds like anything but a Sean the Bookmaniac book, you're right. It is anything but the kind of book that I would go for. Now, if it was a video documentary, I might look at some of the best parts of it, but as a novel, I hate sports, and I have a very problematic relationship with masculinity, as you may have noticed. I absolutely love this book. So if you want more details, please do check out my review or any other review that you can find, but I loved Stephen Florida. The book and the eponymous hero. Number 9 is The Priest, so an uplifting book. I don't really go for uplifting books. I like to be made to work really hard before I feel uplifted. So for that reason, I put off reading this book for 5 decades, or maybe 4 decades of reading life, because I thought it was going to be too sappy for me. And I finally got to it late last year. I just realized I didn't Google the pronunciation of the author, so I won't even try. But it's The Little Prince. And I absolutely loved it. It is really uplifting and so well done. It's the kind of book that I should probably reread on a yearly basis. It was that good. So if you haven't read this and you have a similar allergy against spiritual crap or overly sentimental writing, this is one that's going to slip through all that and grab you, I think. Or it did me. Last prompt, right? Have I missed any? I have not. Is Gavroche. So this is a short, unexpectedly good read that took me by surprise. The Little Prince would work for that, but I have chosen a Japanese novel in translation. I bought it for my niece last year for Christmas because she loves cats. And I decided, what the hell, I'll read it before I give it to her. But I don't like cats, or I'm indifferent to cats. I'm not a pet person at all. So I didn't think it would be for me, but I loved it. So it's called The Guest Cat by Takashi Hirade. And it's about a young Japanese married couple in Tokyo, childless. And they don't have a cat, but they start playing with the neighbor's cat. and that cat starts wandering in and out of their apartment or their house several times a day. But they're not the owners, but they develop this deep relationship with the cat. And the way that it's all described, and I don't know, with the translation, I never know whether to credit the author or the translator, but it's so well written, and I'm not a cat person, and I loved it, and it's a short little read, so I was taken by surprise. So that was a fun tag. Thank you very much for it. Just one reader. I tagged the following, I don't know how this ended up all being men, but so let me just say, anybody who wants to do this tag, please do it, but I'm specifically singling out Curtis of Curtis Books and Films, Steve Donoghue in perpetuity, Luukashist Books, and my new booktube buddy, who's been making me so happy with so many comments on my videos recently, RichardReads, who needs to make a new video, so maybe this is the one for you to get back into the game. That's it. Thank you for your attention. Have a good day.